We now have Brad Limpert. Brad practices principally in the areas of intellectual property litigation. Prior to practicing law, he worked at IBM Canada in software development, project management, and marketing. Brad is an electrical engineer and a biomedical engineer, as well as LLB. He has taught patent and trade secret law as an adjunct professor at Faculty of Law at University of Toronto. Today, Brad will be talking on legal issues in branding, essentially to help you avoid serious costs at later stage, as well as avoid risks and avoid a possibility of reduced valuation. Earlier this week, Brad advised a client that closed $11 million seed stage round of financing. The client's business is in green chemical engineering technologies. Brad is recognized by Intellectual Asset Management magazine of London, UK as one of the world's top 250 patent licensing lawyers. Brad is currently lead counsel in one of the largest patent litigation cases in Canada. He is the author of a leading book called Technology Contracting, published by Thomas. Please help me welcome Brad.
Thanks very much. I understand I stand between you and dinner, so I'll try to be at least on time. So, I'm going to drill down a little bit to talk about legal issues in branding. And the reason I want to do this, and I've got a couple of goals for the next half hour and then into the Q&A. One is I want to provide some of the key legal aspects of branding to you. And the reason that I want to do that is I want to help you avoid serious errors, okay? And what I call a serious error is when you can't fix it down the road at reasonable cost. Because if you're an entrepreneur, one of the definitions of an entrepreneur is that you're sort of building towards future value, but you do not have current resources to execute your plan. And so it's very common for entrepreneurs to try to cut corners where they can, where that makes sense, to try to be very careful about that value versus spend equation at any point in time. And so it's really common that entrepreneurs try to reduce their spend and their cost in areas that I might call legal or intellectual property. And that's fine. And that makes a lot of sense until you can't fix the problems that causes down the road at reasonable cost. And the problems in my area of practice that I see, it's where that significantly reduces valuation of the business or where it materially increases the risks for founders, investors, or partners. So let me give you a couple examples of that. So it's very common, you come to a round of investment, and really this is all through the paradigm of either taking investment into your business or having a liquidity event, selling your business, or getting sued. Okay? And those are kind of the paradigmatic activities that I tend to work in. And what happens here is that if you mess up upstream, then when it comes time to have one of those activities, like an investment or exit from your business, if you have messed up, it means that instead of taking X out, you're going to take half X. The other thing that happens is, increasingly what happens is when you go to sell your business or take investment, they go to you and they say, you messed up, or, well, they don't say it that way, of course, they're much more tactful and diplomatic. They say, we have significant concerns here, and we're not willing to close this transaction unless you give us some forward-going comfort. And that forward-going comfort is in the area of some sort of a legal guarantee whereby you, probably personally, will take responsibility for what they're worried about. And what we find is that increasingly at exit or liquidity events or other sorts of things, the intellectual property issues are the primary risk facing the exiting investors, but it's also facing founders when investment is coming in. And so this is a huge, huge issue. I was involved in a exit recently. It was actually one of the, it was a Thai, the Thai Quest business plan competition. My client had been one of the winners a few years ago. The business went along. They finally had an exit event, and so someone was buying the business, which was great news. Great outcome for everybody. And I spent half of my summer holidays talking on the phone with lawyers around, with a particular lawyer in the States who was acting for buyer, because they just wanted a laundry list of representations, warranties, legal promises, things that were intended to shift risk onto my client in terms of the intellectual property issues. And for my client said, listen, all the other, and you put together a deal like this and it's just hundreds and hundreds of pages of legal documents. But he said, the only thing I'm really worried about is the intellectual property risk, because he and his exiting sort of partners didn't want to be sued down the road for some sort of intellectual property problem. And that was a real live material risk for them, okay? And so you want to design intellectual property into your products, services, relationships, and transactions, and you want to make it a blessing, not a curse. Because if you don't intentionally and thoughtfully do this design, then it'll be a curse. It'll either be the curse that it'll suck value out like mad, or it'll cause at the end of the day people to want you to put your, basically, whatever upside you took out of it on the line, plus whatever else value and wealth you have, okay? So, I'm just going to stop there for a second. And I'm just going to sort of quite practically and pragmatically talk a little bit, when you're thinking about branding, what sort of things, like I sort of made my top 10 list, okay? So one thing when you're branding is you want to avoid the chupa chups problem. Okay, so this is, according to my kids, these are the best lollipops, okay? They taste better than anything else. And this is a worldwide brand. You can get this brand all around the world. This brand has disproportionately low sales in Mexico, okay? Does anybody know why? Anybody know why this lollipop doesn't sell well in Mexico? Anybody guess?
Chupa chup probably means something.
Yeah, it means something bad. That's exactly right. So chupa, apparently, I'm told, I have no personal experience with this. Chupa is a part of a phrase of something that one does with a prostitute in Mexico. Okay? So as you can imagine, there are a number of Mexican mothers who do not want their kids bringing home a chupa chop.
So they must sell well in Las Vegas.
That's right.
Sorry.
And I'm further told that this was, because you can think about this, right? You can think maybe that was their plan. Like maybe they did it to be provocative or something like that. I think, in fact, that's not the case. It was totally inadvertent.
Yeah.
And they built this, international brand despite that, okay? So you want to think about sort of, meanings of your brand or your wordplay in other languages. You also want to think about ironic meanings of your words. So, like, is anybody familiar with the Ashley Madison website or what that? So ashleymadison.com, that's a website for people who want to conduct extramarital affairs. So that's its target. It's a very narrow niche. It's not just an internet dating site. It's specifically for people who are in married or common law type relationships who want to commit adultery or whatever you want to call it. Okay. Now Ashley Madison, that sounds like Martha Stewart. It sounds like some elderly Victorian aunt, and I think that's precisely what they wanted to do. They didn't want anything that either could be parodied or made fun of or satirized, and in fact it points in almost the exact opposite direction to what their business model and the product and service they're selling. Okay. So I think that's really important. Another just easy tip is don't steal somebody else's logo or brand. Okay? So you don't want to start a business that is called "I'm better than Google" or Google Plus, right? Because Google will sue you. Google will drive you into the ground. And the thing for early stage businesses is you don't have the money for that fight. Okay? So you just want to avoid that fight entirely, right? So it's like, if you're a kid on old-fashioned playgrounds, the bully's in the corner, the teachers could care less, you stay away from the bully, because nobody's going to help you, right? So you need to do that, right? So it's all about you need to do things that will avoid just shooting yourself in the foot early on, because you cannot, as an entrepreneur, generally survive that sort of thing. The other thing is, beyond pure survival, you also have to think just about how you're going to build value and add value into your business. I have a client that I'm working with that hopefully will close around the financing next week. And I really admire this guy. This guy he's literally operating out of the spare room of his mother's house. And he has worked, without pay for about 6 months. He's about to close around where he'll get about $5 million based on pre-money valuation of about $2.5 million. And really his investment is sweat equity, what he knows, because he's a very knowledgeable guy, very bright guy. And quite frankly, about $20,000 or $30,000 in legal fees, right? And that legal fees, it's been very interesting, right? Because he has all the way along, and we've done like about 2 or 3 major steps of the way. The people he's dealing with are, quite frankly, I mean, they admire him, they're willing to invest money with him, but they're trying to take him for everything he's worth. In a very nice way. In a very, they've got money and he wants the money. But, and that's been an enormous learning experience for him to realize that these people that he's known for a long time, respects tremendously, they're great people. But when it comes right down to it, it's not like they want to take over the business and take all the upside. And they're testing to see whether he is okay with that. And it's not at all apparent, from just a common sense point of view, it's not at all apparent how they're doing that, right? So he's been very, very effective at taking advice on how to avoid that. And that's something, big picture that you have to do, okay? And, you need to get advice on where you'll get the most value for money, right? Where do you need to actually sort out issues, where you need to be precise and accurate, okay? One thing you can do in the branding area to do this is there are free online databases. So you can search the online databases of the US Patent and Trademark Office. You can search the online database of the Canadian Trademark Office or Canadian Intellectual Property Office. That is just good common sense. It would be not very well advised to think about a brand name or logos or wordplay for your business and not do that and invest time, energy, money into that only to find out down the road that somebody else had registered a very similar word or phrase for a similar business, right? Because what you want to do is you want to build strong brands. One of the things that makes Apple such a great brand is it's got nothing to do with computers, right? Like it just is, if you look at bullet number 2, what cannot be registered, words that are descriptive or deceptively misdescriptive. So the key thing there is you do not get strong trademark rights if your trademark describes your product or service or what you do in the marketplace. That is a bad trademark. You want to think about things like Apple. You want to think about things like Google. Like, what does Google have to do with internet search capability? Not very much. You have to really dive into that story to understand what it is that Google has to do with that. Okay? You cannot register a trademark which is a name or surname. Okay? So names are bad, unless they're totally fictitious names that don't have anything to do with anyone. So the real legal test is it can't be the name of someone who's a living individual. Okay? You want to avoid words that clearly designate the place of origin. So don't put Toronto or Canada in your brand or your logo. And then finally, avoid things like RCMP, avoid things like Olympics, avoid putting the Canada flag. Those are all bad things, right? What that is that's an early stage decision that down the road will suck out a tremendous amount of value out of your business and brand. Okay? Now, you don't have to register trademarks, okay? You can just use your trademark in Toronto, and it will be good. You will have certain rights in Toronto, okay? You may not have rights in Whitby, or London, or Kingston, or let alone Vancouver. So you can, just by using a word or a phrase or a design or something, acquire some trademark rights. They're crummy. They only apply where you can prove a geographic location where you've got them. And it probably is kind of short-sighted. You can get a trademark registered for, certainly you can get an application on file for under $1,000. And if you have any meaningful sort of plans for your brand, it's just very good value for money to at least get to register that. Because the thing is, the registered trademarks will give you better rights than a domain name, than a business name, than unregistered trademarks, and anything like that. And ultimately, that can be very valuable to you. Okay. The important reason to register is it gives you, I've got some things here, but practically, it will give you rights in areas of the country where you're not carrying out business, and it will give you rights for prospective or future uses. Okay. I think the other thing that I just want to sort of caution you about, or the next thing I want to caution you about, has to do with giving others rights to use your brand. So you think about the different ways you can carry out business, you can joint venture with people. A classic example, a client of mine, a multinational airline, sort of signed up with a web developer, and the web developer was very savvy. They signed a contract where the web developer said, I'm going to own the website, I'm going to own the domain name. And that was just, a very ill-advised contract for the client to enter into. But the client still had, and it's unclear what that contract really meant or didn't mean, but let's just say that they did own those things, okay? Assuming that's true, luckily my client has registered trademarks, so ultimately that the fact that the web developer thinks they might have rights to that domain name or something like that isn't really that important, because they can't get around my client's registered trademarks, and that's very important in terms of who ultimately can use that out in the marketplace. So you have to be very careful of giving others the right to use your brand. In terms of things like advertising and marketing, in some sectors, bad or misleading packaging or advertising can get you into a lot of trouble. There's a law called the Competition Act, and ultimately, although it happens very, very rarely, you can be thrown into jail if you're offside that. So that includes things like deceptive advertising, misleading advertising. And it's particularly true. There's certain sectors where you really have to be careful. Things like food products, things like nutritional supplements, basically things that can harm human health and safety. You have to be very careful around things like that. For things like if you are putting retail products into the marketplace, you have to be aware of things like the need for bilingual packaging. Okay, and so there are things like that there's just laws, and if you try to market products in breach of that or in violation of those laws, you will be in trouble really quickly. Okay, there's the other major area that I see people get into trouble all the time is in contests. You think about the contests that you might see on the internet or in print, and then typically at the bottom of the contest, or you even see this in radio sometimes, because sometimes contests get advertised on the radio. And at the bottom of the internet contest or the print contest, there's a block of fine print that's about 1,000 words long, right? And that's because people who run contests get into tremendous problems if they don't obey the laws, and there's a lot of laws around contests, okay? And the penalties are not trivial or minor at all. They're very serious and significant. So lots of people think about contests as ways to drive traffic to sites or encourage consumer interest or, do all sorts of things. And those, they can be very effective for those things, but you have to be careful around that sort of thing. Okay. And I think I'm going to stop there because I want to get you to dinner. So, in terms of, does anyone have questions or comments? We have about 5 minutes till we get 7:30, which is the dinner time. Yeah. Okay. So we'll start at the very far back and we'll work where we close.
I'd like your view on whether you can patent a business process, and what requirements are there for this business process to be patented?
Sure. So the question is, can you patent a business process? What are the requirements? The current requirements around the world appear to be converging on the idea that you can do it. First of all, it has to be new. it has to be something, that's very important, right? So you can't simply patent something that people have been doing a long time and you merely automated it. And the other major requirement seems to be, it has to run through a computer system, okay? So in the United States, 5, 7, 10 years ago, there was some thought that you could patent non-computerized, non-technological business methods, things like, and you got a whole bunch of crazy patent applications filed for things like, and even issued, for things like, a method for washing a floor. Go back and forth, start at the far end, go to the, go to the door. Or a method for pushing a child on a swing. And some of these were patented simply because people wanted to show how absurd the law had become. The law is sort of evolving, and I think the current best advice would be to say, yes, you can patent a business method. You need to do it in association with some sort of a, basically, computer device. And if you have those things, and it's new, and it's original, and it's got some element of inventiveness or creativity, you've got a reasonable shot. Next question. Yeah.
Are trademarks protected internationally, or you have to fill out a trademark in every country you are planning to do business?
Yeah, the general answer is you have to fill out a trademark in every country. Okay? It's the true answer is a little bit more complicated than that, and you can preserve certain rights for short periods of time, say 6 months. So if you file in Canada, you might have 6 months to file other applications around the world and still make use of your filing in Canada in terms of establishing your priority. But fundamentally, you have to file all around the world in countries separately. And there's some places where it differs a little bit. You might be able to file in certain regions, like a European trademark application, but fundamentally, just think about it that you're doing it on a country-by-country basis. Yeah.
What are some of the ways in which small businesses can protect themselves if they are entering into relationships with customers or in partnerships with other small businesses?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, what you really have to do is you have to have a contract, a written contract in place that's signed that covers the critical elements, right? So if your business and my business enter into a contract and some of that contract deals with sort of mutual or shared or collaborative cooperative use of trademarks, brands, and logos, you need to specify who owns the brands or logos, who legally benefits from the use of those brands or logos, whether people are entitled to make trademarks or brands that combine that with something else. And you really need to nail that down in the contract, otherwise one of the parties is potentially going to be very unhappy because they're going to lose rights that they thought or wished they had.
Generally, small businesses are not, they don't have knowledge, and also they lack resources in terms of financial resources or otherwise. So is there knowledge out there, or can you point out in the right direction for that?
Yeah, I mean, you can, there's some sources, but it's, you might have a huge problem. And I don't, there's no simple solution to this problem, right? Because if you've got a great brand and you want to do something collaboratively or cooperatively with somebody, you need to go and hire a lawyer, and that's going to cost you, let's say, in the range of $2,000 to $5,000 to get competent counsel in Toronto, if you're in Toronto, okay? You can do it yourself. You can probably find web sources with, precedent contracts, blah, blah, blah. That'll get you about halfway there. So, if you think, 5 years down the road, I want this business to be worth $1 million, sure. If you have no other choice, use that precedent contract or the thing you download off the web. It's probably better than nothing. But is it much better than nothing? Well, it's hard. It's somewhere between the value you would have extracted if you had got somebody competent and that, right? So I would say your $1 million, let's say that there was $1 million riding on the brands, you download something off the internet, you're probably going to preserve $100,000 of that value. So what you're trading off is, in return for spending $2,000 to $5,000 now, you're trading off $900,000 down the road, okay? It's really harsh.
Just to build on his comments, it's hard, because I was with an entrepreneur today about it. It's hard to, I can't stress enough, and I think Brad's going there, is to do the work upfront now. And even if it's spending that $5,000, or it's making a lawyer or a naming expert some sort of a partner in some way, do it now. Because if you will be wearing so many hats, things will become so operative in the way that you're conducting your business that you'll become unfocused and it will not work.
Yeah.
Like
And
you
even
gotta-
very, very smart people, I mean, most
Yeah.
of my clients are, sort of, they all have MBAs and engineering degrees and PhDs and this, that, and the other thing. And they're all very bright people, they're all very, motivated people. And unless they have it from experience, like when they're just starting out, like a lot of stuff I bring them, when we talk about, and there's certain key aspects, strategic aspects of the business that they know, of course, they know far better than I'll ever know. But there's all sorts of stuff that I say, we need to do, or what about this or this? What about this aspect of this? And they'll say, honestly, I just had no idea that that was an issue, right? And that's the problem, it's the unknown unknowns, and it's the things where you don't even know that you're signing away a tremendous amount of value down the stream in your company, right? That's what gets you. And the other thing is, if you think about, downloading things off the internet like draft contracts or sample contracts, the problem is, what effective advisors do is they tell you how is it that sort of sample applies to your facts and your situation, right? I don't have a lot of, if you want to go out and buy my book, you can buy my book for $200, right? Where you get the value, where people get value and why people pay me, that doesn't even cover half an hour of my time, right? Or any other, experienced lawyer who practices in a specialty area. Where you're really getting the time is for somebody to understand what your situation is and tailor in something that actually works for your situation. And quite frankly, that's the 95% of the value in what you're doing. But it's hard, right? Because early stage entrepreneurs, that $2,000 to $5,000, it's like, I guess we're not having as nice of Christmas presents this year,
Yeah.
right? Because I just paid the lawyer, a couple $1,000, and that's a really difficult personal dynamic to have to be in.
I'll just add to what Brad said. You actually realize the value of initial homework only when you're trying to exit the business.
Yeah.
And when you exit the business, you realize, oh, what was wrong in this document or that document, resultingly I had to take so much haircut in my overall valuation. So it's important to be focused on the end result. You're trying to set up this business 5 years down the line, 8 years down the line, you want to achieve an exit, and what you would do, who will buy, and what kind of things they will look for. It's important to pay attention to. And the downloadable contracts are important, surely, because you need to understand what the terms are, and at least you should know what the standard terms are, and then use that knowledge to get the proper customization.
And I just want to add, it's okay, Brad?
Okay.
No, I think one thing too, and Brad was alluding to, like Apple and different names and different logos and marks. I mean, my strong advice, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a branding consultant, but create a fictitious word. Create a word that's fictitious enough that when you go to another country, that it can be customized in some way. And if you look at a lot, I mean, not that my presentation was full of it, but outsourcery, not a word, but a combination of two through wordplay. The Apples of the world, although it's powerful, and they certainly they're building millions of dollars of advertising, millions of dollars of, protecting that icon so that, someone can't launch another product, another category called Apple. So, I mean, my strong advice would be to you guys to really create a fictitious word in some way that has meaning, and then you can be really protected.
Yeah.
You said that you had one client where you spent about 20 to 30K in legal fees. Is that typically normal, like to close around?
No, most spend a lot more. No, unfortunately, I'm serious. I mean, and this is, and I feel, because I think sort of entrepreneurialism is incredibly important, right? And it's how my kids and grandkids are going to have jobs if they want to work in Ontario, and it's incredibly important in terms of societal advance. But for the people who are doing it on the front lines and for the first time, the problem that you have is like that sort of money, like the $20,000, you know, that person is, you know, doesn't have a nice house, doesn't have a nice car, and he's doing that full-time. That's been his full-time job for the last 8 months, right? And he's working that incredibly. Now, he's, like I say, I mean, he's, on the basis of 20 or 30,000 bucks in legal fees, he's now built up a business with a pre-money valuation of $2.5 million, right? So he's doing very well. But he still had to invest that 20 or 30,000, and I'm probably the only advisor he's paying, right? He's taking advice from a number of other people, and they're not paying. You know, he's not paying them, they just have a different business model than I do, right?
Yeah.
And he's found some extremely good mentors where he's getting very good advice from them. And they're contributing as much or more value as I. He just is lucky that he's not coming out of pockets right now.
And building on that, I think you'll find, certainly us as a part of this organization, but other consultants who have different business models to help work in that way,
Yeah.
to make those things work.
Other questions? Just before I go, I just wanted to say thanks to Ty and to Alit and Nakesh and Carl and Suresh, because it's a great program. Thanks very much.
That was awesome.